The compatibility part is huge, right? So make sure you're looking at your IFU to make sure what wrap is compatible with what. And this just means that the wrap has to work with different sterilization methods, such as steam, ethylene oxide, vaporized hydrogen peroxide, and every part works together. If one property fails, then the whole system fails, and that puts your trays, procedures, and patients at risk. So that's why it's important.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
What's going on, sterile processing universe? You're listening to Beyond Clean, Season 29, Planet Assembly. I'm your host, Bobby Parker, and join me in putting on the lab coat today because we're going to take a scientist's look at sterilization wrap. Now, in Planet Assembly, we've been talking about the prep and pack area, assembling instruments, carefully inspecting them, and after that process, we also need to package them. And so as we package these instruments up for sterilization, that packaging has to be able to keep the instruments sterile outside the chamber until they're needed in the OR. We call that terminal sterilization. But frankly, that process has always been a little bit of a mystery to me. How do we have these wraps or these containers that can allow a sterilant in, but then after the cycle, keep all the microorganisms out? Well, to answer that question and more about how we should be handling and using and selecting these sterilization wraps, we're bringing in a research and development engineer, a PhD, mind you, to answer those questions for us and tell us about how we should be selecting and using sterilization wrap. I'm always excited to be recording a Beyond Clean episode, but today I'm particularly excited to get some of these answers. So after a short break, we'll be right back with Dr. Sade Brown.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
And joining me now in studio is Dr. Sade Brown, research and development engineer at Owens and Minor, here to talk to us about surgical wrap. Sade, thanks for joining us on this episode of Beyond Clean.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here to talk about my favorite blue wrap.
I love that. I love that. We connected at the HSPA show this year and got into a really fascinating discussion around surgical wrap. So I want to bring that kind of science-y side of sterile packaging to the audience here today. But before we do that, why don't you introduce yourself, let people know a little bit about who you are and what you've been doing in the industry.
Sure. I'd love to. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sade Brown. I hold a PhD in chemistry with a focus in organic and polymer chemistry. My education background is in polymer formulation with a strong focus in driving innovation and continuous improvement of materials used for many different applications. I currently serve as the R&D engineer at Owens and Minor, specializing in sterilization products, and my work is centered on developing and improving materials for sterile barrier system solutions that are critical for medical applications.
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction. You certainly have achieved a lot in your career. Now, before we dive into the topic today, just so that I'm polite along the way, are you Dr. Brown on this show or are you Sade on this show?
To my friends, I'm Sade.
Okay. All right. Well, if you let me be a friend today, then we'll roll with that.
You're definitely my friend, Bobby.
Okay. Well, so let's start at the top here with some definitions. You know, we introduced the idea of sterile barriers. You said that this blue surgical wrap is your favorite. What is this surgical wrap that we're talking about, and how does it get used in the sterile processing field?
Awesome question. Surgical wrap, some people just look at it as a cover, like, okay, it's just covering the instruments, but it's more than that. It's a tool for infection prevention. I know a lot of people refer to it as surgical wrap, but it's also referred to as sterilization wrap. And that's the type of material used to enclose medical instruments or devices before sterilization. Its main job is to act as a sterile barrier system, allowing sterilizing agents such as steam, vaporized hydrogen peroxide to penetrate while preventing contamination afterwards, right? So after sterilization, it should be able to maintain its sterility until the point of use, allowing the OR to use it, right? Per its validated MPI time point as stated in the IFU for that specific sterile barrier system.
I appreciate that introduction and that definition. Sounds right in line with what I was expecting. I really enjoy all of the conversations we have on Beyond Clean, but we always try a couple of episodes per season to take a peek behind the manufacturing and science curtain. And so I was telling my wife today that I was really excited about this particular show because I tend to nerd out on some of the more technical aspects of what we do in sterile processing. And so she was asking me like, okay, so what's so exciting about this wrap stuff? So I was trying to explain it to her, like, when you go to the dentist and they peel open the pouch of all the little things that they shake out onto the tray, like that pouch had to be made to allow the things inside to get sterile, but then after the sterilization process to keep it sterile and clean. And she's like, oh, okay. I'm glad you think that's interesting, honey. but it is interesting thinking about how to manufacture a material or package that's going to allow the sterilant to penetrate in such a way that you can get enough volume and flow through there to get the instruments inside sterile so you can get that contact. But then afterwards, after it's cooled down, come out of the chamber, that it creates a barrier that would keep the tiniest of microorganisms out of the package. That's always been a little bit of a mystery to me. I'm curious in kind of the design and manufacturing process, like, what are some of those key factors that make a sterile barrier work in the first place?
So when we talk about what makes a sterile barrier really work or truly effective, it's not just one thing. And I think that's what you see sometimes, people like hone in on one property or one aspect of the sterile barrier system. It's a combination of key factors working together. So first, there is bacterial filtration, right? I'm sure you've probably heard of that. Also known as BFE, if you didn't know what it stands for. Some people say BFE. This tells us how well the wrap works, right, to prevent microbial ingress, which is the act of bacteria entering the wrap, which can actually stop the bacteria from getting in, because even the smallest breach can lead to contamination. However, you just can't block bacteria if the wrap tears when it's handled, right? So BFE goes out the window. So that's why you next have to focus on material strength. And that's both in the machine and the CD direction. And that just means it needs to hold up against tearing, puncturing, no matter how it's handled. But then you say, okay, well, material strength is one factor, but you just can't have a strong wrap and it does not allow the steam to penetrate through. Well, that leads to the property of porosity, right? It needs to be just right. This speaks to the wrap's ability to let sterilizing agents like steam or gas, ethylene oxide, block the contaminants, let those sterilizing agents in, but block the contaminants from entering into the sterilization wrap. And finally, the compatibility part is huge, right? So make sure you're looking at your IFU to make sure what wrap is compatible with what. And this just means that the wrap has to work with different sterilization methods, such as steam, ethylene oxide, vaporized hydrogen peroxide, and every part works together. If one property fails, then the whole system fails. And that puts your trays, procedures, and patients at risk. So that's why it's important.
Yeah, it sounds like a little bit of a balancing act, right? If you were to only focus on one, to prevent bacterial ingress, to your point, maybe it would be so tightly woven or manufactured in such a way that it wouldn't allow enough of the sterilant through. So that's really interesting. All right. So one follow-up question on the science piece of it that's mysterious to me about those two factors, preventing the microbial ingress, or I can't remember what BFE stood for because I wasn't taking notes of what you're saying. So you can tell me that piece of it, but how it can prevent that at at one time and then allow the sterilant through at another? Like, does the wrap go through some kind of change in the chamber of, it's got pores open, allowing sterilant through at that point that close up later? Or am I conceptualizing this all wrong?
No, that could very well be the case. I haven't studied that far as of like what the material is doing. And I think that is very interesting. And we're starting to actually study more about what's happening inside the sterilizer and try to measure those, like just to see what's happening when it heats up. But from a stance of polypropylene, I may can speak to how it reacts under heat. But going back to your question and how it protects bacteria from getting in, as well as allowing sterilant to get in, it goes back to the size, right? To think about it, I'll give you an example. Think about a filter for coffee, right? It allows the water and certain and the color and then the concentrate of the coffee to actually get into the cup that you're going to utilize for coffee, right? However, the grounds doesn't get in. It separates it out.
Yeah,
So
I
it's like a
suppose.
filter.
Yeah, I suppose that's helpful to think through. It's just microorganisms are so small, which is where my brain is kind of broken on this as to how does it do that effectively? But it's going to have to remain a little bit of mystery in my mind, I suppose.
But to go back to BFE, that is actually a test that measures the amount of or the size of the bacteria that actually can go through, like
Okay.
your sterilization wrap. So that there's a measured, the BFE is actually a industry standard test that is accepted. It was mostly used for face masks, but we as in the industry started to use it for sterilization wrap to have a better insight on what speaks to BFE for us for the sterilization wrap that we're creating. So there's like a percentage you get when you complete the test, and it can range from 90% for some materials, depending on the material. So if it's like some studies show like cellulose being a little on the low end when it comes to BFE, but SMS, spunbond, is like one of the best materials for the prevention of bacteria because it has a high BFE value.
And that's probably why all the single-use wraps that we use in sterile processing pretty much are made of that SMS instead of the older reusable linen wraps or things like that. I imagine that has a big piece of it. So we are way down in the weeds right now, and I'm loving it. But just kind of bringing this back to a practical perspective as we think about these wraps, this is the first time that I've really heard about those studies or the performance of different types of materials and it being measured in a number. Are there competing manufacturers that are trying to outdo one another in this score, or is it more just a manufacturing requirement to come up with a particular number to satisfy the FDA? Like, is any of this BFE number something that a sterile processing manager or technician should really, really care about or should know about for the type of packaging that they have in their department?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the great question. It goes back to us stating the key factors. BFE is not the only factor you should be concerned with, but you should be concerned with it as a property of the sterilization wrap you're getting. If you have a sterilization wrap that's relatively the same price but has a higher BFE, I mean, it speaks to me that I will go with a higher BFE because my trust will be a little bit higher as it relates to data showcasing that, okay, this wrap is showing its performance in BFE is outdoing other wraps. And I love that for me in selecting this wrap and knowing that, patient safety, like less bacteria is able to get through. Basically, the barrier is performing super well, like it's superior in comparison to other sterilization wraps. But I wouldn't say it's a competitive thing. I would like to say that most manufacturers are racing to make sure that we can provide better patient safety and quality of medical devices to the end user, to the patient. I think that's the overarching point.
No, that makes sense. And I imagine I would have heard by now if there was a smear campaign going on out there that says, don't buy those wraps. Like they let too high of a percentage of microorganisms through or something like that. I'm sure they're all safe to some respect, but that is really fascinating to hear about the thought and the design that goes into selecting materials. Now, we're talking about the sterilization wraps primarily as a packaging method here, but there are certainly others to choose from, like the peel pouches I alluded to that you see at the dentist office, or even the rigid containers that have filter systems in it that work in, I'm sure, some sort of similar manner. But since we're talking about sterilization wraps, what are some of the advantages or disadvantages that this method has if you're picking out a way to get some terminal sterilization packaging for a tray? What's the ups and downs of the sterilization wrap?
Well, on the plus side, sterilization wrap is lightweight, it's flexible, it's easy to handle in comparison to some of your sterile barrier systems out there, and it's customizable, meaning it works with all sorts of trays and shapes. You have many different medical designs or instrument designs where, they're a little wonky and like they're not really like straight. You got some weird curves going on there. So sterilization wrap is really great when it comes to those different types of trays with different shapes and
Yep.
sizes.
Shout out to the Alvarado foot holder for those out there who have had to wrap one of those things. There is no way to wrap it. I'm convinced. I can't do it. Or the tibial
I think I'll
triangle.
be able to do it. I need
Okay.
to try now. I have a challenge.
Okay. But yeah, it's certainly customizable, but I cut you off. Keep rolling.
Oh, no, you're fine. It has high bacterial filtration performance, helping to keep contamination out. So that's one of the great performances or advantages for sterilization wrap, as well as it's easy to inspect. You can tell if there's a tear cut or hole. Some wrap manufacturers have actually made it easy for you to determine if there's a tear cut and hole in comparison to you just having like wrap that's not, the two layers are not able to be distinguished because of the darker color. Like both colors are dark, so it's really hard for you to tell. And it stores easily. Simple storage, big bonus for the SPD, right?
For sure. I feel like when we talk about advantages and drawbacks, the big disadvantage that people often talk about is the holes, right? The problem of we only had one of these trays and it was a funky shaped loaner. So we kind of had to wrap it. And then sure enough, when they inspected in the OR, there's a hole there. What are some things that facilities either should be thinking about or could be doing to try to shore up that disadvantage of their being holes in the wraps all the time?
Well, from what I've seen, visiting hospitals and talking to the OR and the SPD, is the handling of sterilization wrap trays. And that's why I think it's important for people to know what is sterilization wrap, how does it work, because the way you handle it will probably be, the way you think about it, the way you handle it will probably resonate with you. And knowing that, okay, this is supposed to protect these instruments that will be used for surgery, right? Open surgery. I need to be more mindful about how I handle this instrument tray, given the knowledge I know, like what the performance is of the sterilization wrap. But stacking of trays, right? And properly handling them too rough sometimes. And I understand, look, I lifted the 25-pound tray, so I can understand how you just want to drop it, how you just want to push it, how you just want to slide it. But that can degrade the performance over time. And you're putting sterility at risk each and every time. So that is the cause, from what I see, of most of the tears, cuts, and holes is the handling of the sterilization wrap trays after sterilization, not before, after sterilization. And it could very well be the ergonomics part of it, where the tray is too heavy and people are trying to take as much weight off of them as possible by sliding it and not lifting it, but you have potential to cause a tear, cut, or hole.
Part of the trouble that comes with the handling discussion is it isn't always the SPD technicians, right? Maybe you've got that vendor representative who's, in there slamming trays into carts, trying to get things ready because he's in a hurry. Not that I observed that personally in the department that I managed. it always blew my mind. Like, Guy, these are your trays. You're the one who's going to have to look the doctor in the face if it's got a hole in it. Like, help me out here and handle this thing carefully. So yeah, figuring out that chain of custody piece of who's going to handle the trays and how are we going to train them to handle them carefully and effectively. I want to come back in a minute to what you said about stacking and degrading the effectiveness of the material, because I think that's an important piece of it. But there's one more part to this handling bit that I wanted to call out as well. One facility that I was at that really struggled with the holes in their wraps. We're actually getting the holes prior to sterilization. We followed their trays through the sterilization process. They had very good and careful handling practices. But in their assembly area, in the assembly station, the technicians preferred to set their trays and inspect them on top of a stack of wraps so that they didn't have to go get one and lift the tray up, put the wrap down, put the tray back on it. So they put a whole stack of wraps on their workstation, set the tray on top of it, and then begin inspecting. Well, it only takes one Butterfingers moment to drop a kind of heavy nitrile on the wrap and put a little micro hole in it that you don't notice because there's no light underneath these. And so all you see is just the wrap with a stack of wraps underneath it. And then you wrap up the tray, send it on through, and sure enough, when they unwrap it, there's a hole in it. So that was an interesting one to find. So maybe if that's you struggling with wraps out there, make sure that we're only putting those things fresh and brand new on the table whenever it comes time to wrap the tray, because we might be dropping sharp stuff on them, and that might be what's causing it. So anyway, fun little side story there. So back to the other big kind of drawback that gets talked about a lot for wraps, which is stacking. Now, obviously, if we're stacking the trays too high such that we have to drag them across one another and we're tearing them that way or we're snagging them on shelves, that's an issue. But if we're careful to place the trays on top one of one another and stacking them in that fashion, am I correct in assuming that there is still potentially some risk there because of the material getting squished and compressed? Is that true? Like, does stacking and putting too much pressure on these wraps degrade their performance in keeping bacteria out of the trays?
Yes, over time it can degrade performance. Yes, it can, but you also want to be, and that's called compression damage, right? If you compress something over time and you keep stacking these 25-pound trays on top and on top, you're actually slowly weakening the material over time, which can worsen, and it can lead to like these tiny micro tears that people may see. And it could be because of your tray, right? Some trays have like sharp edges, and the more pressure you're putting on them, you're weakening that point, and the pressure that you're applying is becoming a catalyst to a tear cut or hole. But even the outer layers get torn and punctured. Now you're facing a serious cross contamination from it. So I just say don't do it. But if you're going to stack, you have to stack. Make sure it's done with like the proper racks, supports, or separators. Anything that can take pressure off the wrap itself. That's my whole. I understand some people feel it as if they need to do it and they feel like they're doing the most careful way, but you can still weaken the material over time where you are again inciting a point where a tear cut or hole could happen. So you're gambling with a tear cut or hole at this point once you start stacking.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm thinking about the loaner trays that have kind of the feet in the four corners.
Ooh.
And so if you don't have it, yep, don't put feet on your trays. Vendors, they get stuck on the washer rack. They're hard to sterilize. If you don't have some kind of corner protector on those, over time, when you pick it up and look at the bottom of it, there are these four kind of light blue or white wear spots where the foot is just from getting dragged. Even if there's not a tear in it, like, we're definitely stressing that material in a big way. And so I just thought that's interesting that, holes aren't necessarily the only risk when we're thinking about how to take care of our wraps. And like you mentioned, those storage solutions, that's a big market of people trying to figure out how do we get custom sterile processing focused storage solutions that aren't just repurposing the same racks that are used in warehouses across the country at Amazon, so that we can have either a single tray setup or limiting the number of trays that we're stacking. For departments that are really struggling with that, you've just got the wire racks with, the 8-foot shelf with 5 levels on it. One of the things that I found effective, if you don't have the budget to totally replace your rack system, is just to add more levels. Make it impossible, or at least really difficult, to stack some trays. So if you, rather than having 5 levels on this 6-foot tall rack or whatever, maybe have 7 levels so that there's not as much space in between the shelves, so that you can only fit 1 tray in there, or maybe 2 if they're lightweight and small and we're okay with stacking those. So yeah, just thinking about those practical solutions to discourage the type of stacking that happens, because nobody's doing this maliciously. We're trying to solve a problem and get our work done. And so let's create practical solutions for them to be able to get that work done without putting the patient at risk.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to work on, we as, in the engineers are starting to work on, we hear the concerns from the SPD and the OR, and we're always reaching out to see how we can actually, help them, or bring a new product to the market, or give a solution on the stacking issue, or solution on space. So I think that's very, very important. And we have some solutions that we're looking into, or that from, conversations with the SPD and the OR. One is, like you said, like, create more shelves, but put the lighter stuff at the top and then the heavier stuff at the bottom. So you're not lifting a 25-pound tray over your head. Like, that should definitely go at the bottom, so the lighter stuff can go at the top, and you can create more shelves that way in more space.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned listening to the customer and trying to innovate in the sterile packaging realm. I'm curious, and as we're kind of coming to a close here in the interview, I want to know, what's your perspective on what innovation might look like for sterile packaging? As I think about sterile barrier systems, there has been some of that innovation in recent years, but for the large part, we've had single-use SMS wraps for a while. We've had rigid containers for even longer than that, I'm sure. And we've had these peel pack systems. Like, what is coming next or new in the sterile barrier world as we look forward 5 or 10 years?
There's a lot of things that interest me that I can see coming to the forefront, Bobby. I mean, one, let's start with AI. Right?
Mm-hmm.
AI is taking off. And I just recently came from a conference, and they were talking about AI in healthcare. I think they're starting to look at, what I was thinking about was like AI-based trade prep checks, where there's like this camera system that can verify the instrument placement, as well as labeling before sterilization. Like, so more like a digital traceability, but also like a verification type of system using AI. And that goes into smart packaging as well, utilizing the radio frequency identifications, RFIDs, to tag or to track the sterilization cycles and exposure, to let you know, like, if it's fully sterilized. I know some people are working on that. Some people have that. I think that's interesting, as well as sustainability will never go away. And eco-friendly materials, right? So I think you have a number of engineers out there working on materials that reduce environmental impact without sacrificing performance. That could even be reducing the sterilization wrap weights or basis weight, and it's still being stronger than a sterilization wrap that has a heavier weight, right? Like, how do you view performance? And that speaks to improved SMS technologies, enhancing the strength while it remains lightweight. Like, just because you add more weight there, you're adding more of an issue now when it comes to porosity, right? The sterilant being able to get in and get out. So we're trying to, us as scientists and engineers, we're trying to find the balance of all the properties, but also bringing something innovative to the medical industry, the healthcare industry, that will assist the end user.
Well, that's why I love going to trade shows, Sade. You get to see what everybody's been cooking up and working on and all the solutions. So if you're out there listening and you haven't been to one of the big HSBA shows, or even your local chapter, and gone to the vendor expo, you should do it. The education is worth being there for, but my favorite part as a new leader was always walking around that vendor floor and seeing what all the new innovations are, and then coming home kind of sad knowing you can't buy any of it or having your wish list to start, working on the capital request. So we'll keep our eyes open for continued innovations in the sterile barrier conversation. Sade, thanks for the interview. Really great talk. I learned some new vocabulary today, so I'm going to have to write that down and impress my friends later. If people want to continue the conversation with you about sterile barrier systems or have questions about wraps, what's the best way for folks to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. I plan to start posting more things related to, or more information related to blue wrap, related to medical devices out there on the market, and speaking to the chemistry of it all. I think, again, if you understand how it works, what performance properties look like, how they're measured, you have more of a sense of how you should handle certain things, right? Even things that may be around your house, it may open up something for you to start researching the things you use daily. Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me.
Well, thank you for that. And that's what it's all about, knowing the why behind what we do so we can be better at it and keeping our patients safe. So, well, thanks again. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Bobby.
All right, that was Dr. Sade Brown laying some new vocabulary on us in sterile processing around how these sterile barrier systems work and what it takes really to put together a good sterilization wrap. One of the things that she mentioned that we didn't get into a whole lot, but there at the end of that conversation around the weight of wraps, I think is an important consideration. Did you know that the wraps that you likely use in your department today come in different models and different weights and thicknesses? You probably do. The smaller ones that you might wrap like an orthopedic battery in or something feel very thin. But if you were to go to the IFU of the wrap that you're using and look at the breakdown for the recommendations of the weight that's intended to be held inside of each of those models, you might be surprised to find out that not every surgical wrap is intended for a 25-pound tray. Maybe you're ordering the big, 4 foot by 4 foot square wraps that are double thickness so that you can do it in one folding technique. But maybe you're not ordering the thickest wrap that they have, and it recommends for the wrap that you bought only to be for, say, 15 or 17 pounds inside instead of the 25. Something that caught me by surprise many years into sterile processing. And so go take a look at your IFUs and make sure that the way that you're using it and the wrap that you're ordering match up, that you're happy with how easy it is to detect any rips or tears in it, that you're happy with the performance of it, but also that it's validated for the weight of the contents that you're wrapping inside of it. So like we always end up saying on these Beyond Clean episodes, read your IFUs and make sure you're using it accordingly. I hope that this was helpful to you. And for those of you who stuck around to the end here on this more technical episode, I think we are cut from the same cloth. I found it really interesting. I hope you did too. That's going to do it for today's episode of Beyond Clean. We'll leave you as we always do here, reminding you until we talk again next time, keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.